Hello again. I'm Jim Deacon, and this is City Talk, a program that spotlights the departments and agencies of the City of St. Charles, their programs and services, and their staffs, the people that make it all work. If there's one word that very closely associates so well with the City of St. Charles, it's the word history. And because of that importance, as a city that makes history and has history, we're going to expand our horizons in two different ways today. First of all, we're going to go outside city government, which is something we hardly ever do. And secondly, we're going to go outside the city limits of St. Charles to talk about history. And we're very pleased to have with us Miss Amy Hake, an archivist with the St. Charles County Historical Society. Amy, welcome to City Talk.
Thank you.
I guess for the benefit of people who may not be real familiar with the organization, tell us a little bit about the Historical Society.
Well, the Historical Society as it is today is basically the third iteration of the Historical Society. There were two other former societies created at one time, one in 1916 and the other in 1937. And unfortunately for those organizations, they both folded due to, as it said, lack of interest. Now, I find that a little hard to believe, but if you consider the times that they were formed, one right before a world war started, the other right before another world war would start, you might consider that the people of our community had other things to think about. Our organization was created in 1956, so we turned 60 next year. And it was created by interested people who were really involved in preserving history at the time, and two, by the St. Charles County Community Council. Came together and suggested that this organization be formed. But one of the big spearheaders behind the organization, I have to say, was, and I'm very proud to kind of fill her shoes now, was Edna McElhenney Olson. She was the very first archivist in 1956. They started with charter membership of about 100 people, and membership dues were only $1 at the time. By the next year, they had well over 200 people, and it has grown so on. Then, of course, the membership dues have gone up. $25, though, is a economical amount for an individual.
Reasonable, sure.
Yes.
Now, I would guess that, and certainly the Great Depression came in the middle of all that too, but given the gap between the second iteration of the Historical Society and your current organization's founding in 1956, that's a pretty hefty gap. I imagine you folks had a lot of catching up to do.
Yes, but there were always, I think, concerned citizens who were helping the situation by holding on to materials and artifacts. And then when the organization was recreated again, the influx of those materials into the society was great. One of the other reasons why the society formed was you have to think about what else was going on in the city at the time, and that was the reclamation of South Main Street, starting with the first Capitol buildings.
Right.
The members who created the Historical Society were primarily interested in preservation of those buildings, South Main 200 to 216, Peck's Row, basically.
Right.
So, and with their restoration, then other like-minded citizens saw that it was possible to reclaim the rest of South Main, which during the 60s, could be looked at as a blighted area.
Oh, sure.
So,
sure.
People who have an immense pride in their community and interest in the history of the community really see fit to preserve not just family items, but other important documents and artifacts that are significant for the county history. And I'll add that in 2009, we expanded by merging with the St. Charles County Genealogical Society. They were losing their digs and needed a place. And also in the case of many kinds of societies, as the membership ages, and you don't have an influx of younger people coming into, the society begins to wonder, how can we sustain ourselves?
Sure.
And the merger, I think, did that, as now the mission of the Historical Society is not just to preserve the history, but to preserve the genealogical record as well.
And now, we talked about how the organization grew, slow. What's the size of the organization today?
Well, we have over 750 members right now. It has been more at times, and of course it has been less at times, and certainly we would like to see more members. I would say generally we have an older membership as well, and we're very interested in acquiring young people to come into the membership, young families especially. Because I think one of the important parts of preserving the history of a community is getting young people interested in where they live and what was there before them.
Right. And I think in a community like St. Charles, and I presume that it's much the same throughout the county, we're dealing with a community that is essentially rooted here for generations. We have any number of families who can trace their own genealogies back over multiple generations, and maybe it's good to have a wake-up call every now and then for people not to take that heritage for granted, but to be involved in preserving it.
And equally, it's important for those people who have moved into the community from elsewhere as well, because if they're building their families here, their young people, I think, have to have a sense of place and know the history as well. I mean, I'm a native myself. I was born and raised in St. Charles County. Always thought of St. Charles City as being my city. I went to Sacred Heart Academy for 13 years. No, I didn't flunk a grade.
I was just going to ask you that. Summer school? Yeah.
No, kindergarten all the way through high
there you
school.
go.
So, so I felt very much akin to the city life, but I grew up on a farm in the county. And I've moved elsewhere and I've lived elsewhere, but I always feel like I've taken the city and the county with me wherever I've gone. Funny little story I have, and I tell a lot of people, is that when I lived in New York City, and I didn't know the city well, so the young man who I was about to marry, he and his father took me on a subway ride one day and left me down around the area of Lower Manhattan where the trade towers used to stand, and told me to find my way back to the apartment, which was all the way north in Washington Heights, the northern section of Manhattan. Well, I was flabbergasted because they went off and did that, just that, left me. They weren't looking at me around the corner of a building or anything. So I thought, okay, all I need to do is retrace my steps, or the steps that we took, but we had changed trains. So I went down into the subway and bought my token, and I asked for instructions from the token seller. But it was so quick, and of course it was with a New York accent. I didn't really catch it all. So I go down and I look at the map, and to me the map was just a conglomeration of different signs and different colored lines. So this gentleman in a three-piece business suit and a briefcase comes up to me and says, can I help you? Do you know where you're going? And I looked at him and I said, well, I think I have a good idea. I just don't know exactly which trains to use. And he immediately started laughing and said, where are you from? Because he noticed my voice was different. And I told him I was from St. Charles, which was a small community northwest of St. Louis, Missouri. And he said, "Oh my God, there is life west of the Hudson." So, yes, and I told him a little bit about St. Charles. So, and that's the case wherever I've lived. I'm very proud to be a native. And Bill Popp, who used to be the former archivist at the society, used to say when he saw me coming, "Oh, here comes the native," you know. So,
Yeah, that's great, and I think that pride, that sense of belonging, sense of home, I think a lot of people in the city and county share that. And what does the historical society do? I mean, it's got to be just more than collecting photographs and documents and those kinds of things, right?
yes, certainly that's one of our main focuses, but education is another, and we do that through various means. We have focus meetings on genealogy for those folks who are primarily interested in family search and increasing their knowledge of their genealogical lines. We also offer quarterly meeting luncheons and programs, usually take place at Staten's Banquet Center. And we just recently have done something which is brand new for the society, and that was to host a living history gala, which was commemorating the end of or the 150th anniversary of the ending of the Civil War. And we held that at the Grand Opera House on Main Street.
Oh, great.
And we think it was a grand success, and we hope to do similar kinds of programs in the future because, you know, people learn history all kinds of ways.
Sure.
And whether they read a book or sometimes even watching a movie, going to a museum. But for the most part, and I've been involved in museum work for a long time, and I've heard people say that they didn't know that history could be so interesting. Because what they remember history, they remember learning it in school and reading it in a textbook, and it
Right.
just didn't come alive.
Right.
So the more we can get people interested in realizing that history isn't a dead thing. Yeah, some history may be in the past, but it is very, very active and alive. And you're making history all the time, you know.
So tell me about this living history gala that you did. How does that work?
Well, we came up with the idea since the anniversary was upon us. We thought, what a better opportunity to use that, and suggest to the participants that they come costumed. So we had lots of women in very, very full skirts, and lots of gentlemen dressed as either North or South affiliation. We had the mayor come and give the opening remarks.
Did was the mayor like North or South, or we didn't?
Well, no,
which?
she was middle of the fence,
Oh, good,
you know,
good.
right on the fence there, you know. We had various members of the society take roles. Justin Watkins, one of our members, took the role basically of Abraham Lincoln and read the Emancipation Proclamation.
Great.
Or no, rather the Gettysburg Address.
Right.
Dr. Gary McKitty made remarks on the Emancipation Proclamation. And Steve Ellman, County Executive Steve Ellman, came and made remarks about the county involvement in the Civil War. And then we had an African-American storyteller, well-known storyteller, Gladys Cogswell, and she presented a story about a young woman who lived in Savannah, Missouri, who was a slave, and gave recollections of what slave life and after the Civil War life for a slave was. You know, so it was very touching, her
Fascinating.
remarks.
Fascinating. And you made a point a few minutes ago that history doesn't just belong to the past. And I guess the Historical Society, most people would associate the Historical Society with its activities regarding the history of the future. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Your organization is very much involved in making sure that as much of our history stays with us as possible, not only in terms of what you collect, but
Right.
thinking about, you mentioned earlier the reclamation of Main Street. And certainly preservation is a huge part of what you folks do, isn't it?
Yeah, and for me, that is one of the best aspects of my role as archivist, because I really get to be involved in a profound, universally appealing, and important role, I think, of humanity, and that is preserving the past for the future, because the past, and whether it's through documents or artifacts, can really speak, and the memories that people have of the past can enlighten the future, especially the future for our young folk. You know.
Right,
So,
and I think a big part of a sense of community, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a big part of it, the sense of community that you find in a place like St. Charles is our collective memory.
Yes.
And you folks are essentially guardians of that
Yes,
memory.
right. And that's why present history is just as important as, far past history, because someday in the future there will be generations who will be looking primarily at this time in history, not necessarily the 1800s or the 1900s, but, you know,
And I guess it gets a little challenging, I suppose, for the organization, for your society, when you're trying to preserve these things, looking at just as we look out at Main Street image that we have here, trying to preserve those things in the face of progress, in the face of changing generations, and
Yes.
maybe sometimes a shifting of values here and there.
right.
You're not actually part of either the city or the county government, so what clout do you have? I mean, do you run into people who just say, I don't really care about that, we're moving on?
Well, yeah, and that's part of my role, basically, is to assess the various materials that come into the society, into the archives, and decide whether or not it's worth keeping. And believe me, I know that that role is important, and I don't take it lightly. Of course, sometimes things come in where we already have a plenty supply of. But I like the ability then to pass another item on to another agency,
Sure.
perhaps, and I've done that in the past. And I think it's important for us to work and collaborate with the other societies, because we have many throughout the county, historical societies. They're smaller than our society, yes. And then it's also important to work with the county government and the city government hand in hand. I mean, the city provides us with our space, a very generous rent on 101 South Main, the old city and fish market building.
Right. Right.
And then the county makes sure that we have a generous supply of records. Of course, we have the circuit court cases.
Sure.
And other court documents that come in. We have naturalization records, death records, birth records, all sorts of church records. I mean, there are things there that I don't even know what we have yet, because I've only been there a little over a year. So
Right.
every day that I'm there, I'm learning something new.
And do you find that you have, I know you're getting support in terms of physical space and access,
Yeah.
but do you find that you have support for your mission among the folks in the city and the county government?
Oh, I think very much so, yes, because they all recognize how important it is. They come to us at times, looking for information which can be pulled from these records. I mean, Steve Ellman has done research in those very same circuit court file materials that he discovered in the county building. But then I have requests coming from, say, a young assistant historian professor at Carnegie Mellon who's looking for information for a book that he's writing, and it's in those circuit court cases, and I'm able to provide him with scans, which will be, I believe he's writing about a St. Charles family, and the documentation is here for his book to be, you know,
Right.
so.
And I would guess that you frequently would get called as a society to consult with both city and county government in terms of planning, what helps us maintain our sense of history and what doesn't.
Right.
If somebody wants to renovate or remodel a building that might
Yes.
have historic significance,
Yes.
then you folks get involved in that, don't you?
Lots of people who are coming in and buying historic homes want to know about the past of the house. So yes, if of course there's some information they can do at the deed level, at the county level, but then coming to us because we do have abstracts and deed materials as well, and have done just that, shown them individuals pictures of their homes back in the 1800s or the 1900s as well. So.
And do you find that most people are supportive of maintaining that flavor?
Oh, indeed, yeah, yes.
Okay, let's talk about the organization, and I know you get the support of the city and the county. You have membership. Do you have any other sources of support or funding, or?
Well, we do, other than the fundraising that we do ourselves, and I mean, we'll be out there at the Festival of the Little Hills, of course, talking about our membership and selling books that we publish and books that we have consignees for. And then we'll have a house tour, which not only pushes our education message, but does raise us some funds. We'll do a trivia night in October that will be held at St. Peter's. But then we do seek both state and federal funds at times. The Missouri State Archives has helped us tremendously, and there's a good collaboration there in assisting us with our materials, especially for preservation of them. Yeah.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier about as an organization, as a society, as you mature, and your membership, especially your active membership, ages a bit. There's always a need and a desire to bring younger people
Yes.
in, and you have a very good way of doing that through your relationship with Lindenwood University, do you not?
Yes, we do, and we take interns from Lindenwood, and in turn, Lindenwood helps us with some of our preservation projects, such as scanning some of our larger books, you know, primarily government ledgers that can no longer be laid flat on a scanning flatbed screen, but have to be kept upright and scanned from above. So.
And what kind of response do you get from the interns? I mean, do you have a supply of people? Is it hard to get people involved?
I was kept busy this past spring with the number of interns, because it's when you bring an intern in, it isn't, for me, it isn't just setting them down to a task and having them work out their hours. It's really working hand in hand, because it's not just them assisting us, it's that I feel like they need to learn something which is going to be part of their history major. It is actually, the internship through Lindenwood is called Applied History. So they're learning the techniques of a historian, archivist, basically, And while they're going through records and perhaps they're doing accession work or they're doing conservation work on them, they get to absorb the material as well and learn at the same time.
Now, if somebody at Lindenwood or somebody else in the community wanted to become an intern, what do they do?
Well, for them to be technically an intern, they have to be associated with a college or a university.
Okay.
And I have accepted interns from other establishments, UMSL, as well as on the community college level as well. They
Right.
can intern. To be a volunteer, all you need to really do is express an interest and come in for an interview, fill out an application, and we'll get you started as soon as you want to start. Whether it is doing collection work, which means basically you're upstairs with me most of the time, or being a research assistant where you're downstairs working with the public and assisting them with their requests and inquiries.
All right, Amy, we've got a few minutes left, and you said that you hadn't been with the society for a very long time.
No.
How did you get involved in being an archivist?
Oh, well, I guess it's bits and pieces of my past. I've worked in, living in New York, I worked for a nonprofit organization, but it was arts related. I moved to Texas after that and had a child and worked for a natural history museum. When I moved back to Missouri, I worked both for, at one time for the St. Louis Science Center, and then finally kind of settled down at the Missouri Botanical Garden, where one of my roles was running the Stubb Teacher Resource Center, which was a small library. And librarian and archival work is very similar,
Sure.
and there's a big overlap. In the final years of my tenure there, I was asked by the director of the education department to coordinate the establishment of the Doris I. Chinook Children's Garden, which is based in 1800s Missouri history, basically. And at the same time, he asked me also to do the coordination of the Tower Grove House restoration. Now, he came to me with these responsibilities because I was basically the only person in the education department, that had a background in Missouri history. But even though I had always had a love of history, this then spurred my interest to go back into history. So I went back to school and got my master's in history. So,
It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we could probably spend an
Yeah.
entire program just on that whole progress. Amy Hake, it's been a delight to have you with us today. We appreciate all the work that you and the society do, and thanks for coming and visiting with us on City
Thank you
Talk.
for having us.
That's going to do it for us for this edition. We'll see you next time on City Talk. So long.